close to 50 metrics to measure. And that's never going to gain traction. And so I think we're still grappling with this point, as to your point, Danny, of how do we measure it in a way that it actually captures what we're trying to measure.
And and I just keep on going back to this. Is this something, standards are good. Like, I'm not saying standards are not good, but is this something that then becomes regulated? Do we end up in a place where it's more important to purpose wash because we need to meet these metrics rather than the purpose of purpose, which is to establish a common goal and direction and take care of our people and other stakeholders?
I'd like to bridge from that, because one of the other things that's happened during this period of time is the Business Roundtable themselves have come out with an update kind of 1 year later to tell us how well they're doing. The statement there was, the current health, economic and racial crisis make it clear that the various systems are all connected and that multi-stakeholder capitalism, there's that phrase again, is the answer to our challenges holistically. They're doubling down on their statement from last year. They talk about 4 things that they're collectively doing. One is investing in worker training and education to reskill for the future. That's right up your alley, Danny. Supporting employee wellness and health benefits, which is interesting in the context of the United States at least. And then advocating. So they're asking government for 2 things. They're advocating on behalf of paid family medical leave, and they're advocating in terms of increasing the minimum wage. Now, this must have Milton Friedman spinning in his grave, because I listened to him this morning. I was looking for some audio clips of Milton, and he has a big rant about how the minimum wage is keeping African Americans repressed, which is really bizarre logic on his part. But I thought it was kind of interesting, because it's not very often that companies ask to be regulated. That was one of the very interesting output from that.
I don't know that it's regulated, though, Chris, because one of the biggest criticisms of the Business Roundtable statement was that it basically was saying that this was all on business and that there was no role for government. That's not the case.
Yeah.
You've heard that, whether you think about what we were talking about with Clint at J&J about, access to talent and worries about co-employment and there's all these issues that government has to be part of the solution. Whether it's just those 2 items that you were talking about or some of these other things we've talked about on the podcast, I think it's in response to that feedback that they've received.
Yeah. So it's not just regulation, it's the money that goes along with regulation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the statement, these various systems are connected.
Yeah.
But it is remarkable, because I don't think we've ever seen a business group actively pushing for the minimum wage to go up. That is uncommon.
Yeah. Interesting. One comment that I wanted to make, just to be annoying about this, was that the spokesperson this time round was the CEO of Walmart. Yeah. And Walmart made the news today because they are amongst the top 4 employers of people on food stamps here in the US.
I think that is a cheap shot in general, because the other thing is what percentage of Walmart's employees are part-time, or there's all sorts of other factors that can also be part of that. And as I think Danny and I have talked about, at least offline, it's easy to take cheap shots at someone like a Walmart, but the people who actually work there are some of the most strident supporters of that organization. Not to say they are perfect, they are definitely not, but it just seems like that's unfortunate. Like, not that it isn't necessarily the case, but there's, I imagine, confounding factors that make the picture a bit more complex than what that headline is saying.
Yep, and perhaps that's the point. These interacting systems are very, very complex. In your presentation at HR Tech, what I took away was how you framed it, where technology is driving all this change. And you talked about 3 different types of change. One was technology is making us all reflect on what it means to be human. The second thing was that technology is allowing us to rethink how we exchange value for our labor with these new work platforms and gig work. And then the third thing was what's showing up in the Edelman Trust Barometer, this complete lack of trust as some of the institutions disappear. They're being replaced by our employer and by the corporations that we're familiar with. And so people are really holding those corporations to be good citizens as well as just efficient users of capital. What worries me a little bit is the impact that corporations can have compared to the impact that government can have, just in terms of the scale and the amount of money and capital they have access to, is always going to be limited.
Yeah, I think that's true. One of the things that's most interesting about that Edelman Trust Barometer is they asked where people got their information about the pandemic from. And people were much more likely to trust their employer than they were to trust the government, including the CDC, because they thought that it was a more straightforward source of information. I think that is just really a reflection of people's perspective on how divided and how politicized just foundational government activities are at the moment. And I agree, it's a dangerous place for us to be trusting companies more than our government. We think that there's some really important work that needs to be done with regard to our democracy and our government, and being sure that regardless of who's in power, we feel like we can trust information.
We're very grateful for the team at NovoEd for their sponsorship of this season. NovoEd will host a live webinar later in the season where Danny, Stacia and I will reflect on what we've learned, the implications for you as learning and talent teams, and take your questions and comments live. To reserve your seat, to get your questions in, and find other bonus materials, please register now at www.novoed.com/purpose. You can access the research that we discuss here and a ton of other great research and insights at www.redthreadresearch.com. And you can subscribe to the podcast, of course, at www.learningisthenewworking.org.